Folks, the Chicago Police Department has been slapped with a lawsuit by a family who was the victim of another botched raid. Now, back in 2019, the Winters family was at home when they heard a loud banging on their front door.
What building plus? Look over there. Is that him?
Red. First building south of the alley.
The lawsuit claims that an officer pointed guns at the thin 4-year-old and 9-year-old sisters, Reshyla and Savayla. Unfortunately, the Chicago Police Department is known for these kinds of botched raids. Now, I want to show this graphic of wrongful raids in Chicago. A CBS investigation uncovered more than 10 families whose homes were wrongly raided by Chicago police, including an incident where officers pointed a gun at a 3-year-old in 2013. Joining us now is Al Hofeld, Jr., the Winters family attorney. Mr. Hofeld, thank you so much for joining us here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. How are you?
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Mr. Hofeld, let's talk a little bit about this situation. As we can see the video, and the more and more, I have to be honest with you, sir, the more and more I see video of police interaction and engagement with citizens, I mean, you know, you're busting into the door, you're disturbing the home. There's this whole thing about pointing guns at children. I mean, this is getting to a point for me, Mr. Hofeld, as I'm watching this, that it's beyond enough is enough. But tell us about, first and foremost, how is the Winters family holding up after this whole situation?
Well, it's been 2 years since this raid, which was in August of 2019. And Reshyla and Savayla are still having real difficulty with their emotions, with the trauma that has scarred them. When I was out at the family's house on the 4th of July, actually, the morning of the 4th of July, and I spoke to Reshyla, and I asked her about what happened. She gets completely silent. She looks down, and then tears start to stream down her face. She is unable, until very recently, she was unable to verbalize, to even talk about in words what happened to her and her sister and how scared they were. At the time it happened, one of the girls wet their bed. They were frozen with fear. The other girl, Savayla, was crying. And since that incident, since that day 2 years ago, they've continued to have nightmares, trouble falling asleep, difficulty concentrating. Reshyla has started to act out by cutting up clothing of her. She cuts up her new pajamas and other. None of these behaviors, none of these things were issues for the kids before this police raid 2 years ago, and they're still living with it. And they're unfortunately, it's likely that they're going to continue to live with it for some time.
Has the family gotten any type of therapy or therapeutic support for Reshyla and Savayla?
They've had some. It's not, it's not necessarily, if you don't have private health insurance, you don't necessarily get the best psychological care and counseling. We do work with some therapists who have a trauma clinic down at the University of Chicago. It's federally funded. So we're in the process of getting them additional counseling and treatment. And, certainly one of the goals of the lawsuit is to recover more than enough money to support high quality ongoing care and counseling for them for some years to come.
And so since this is a part, Mr. Hofeld, this is a part of a larger federal lawsuit. Is that correct, sir? This
is one case of 11 that my firm has brought. The graphic that you showed was terrific. 7 of those cases in your graphic are cases that my firm has brought. We've brought a total of about 11. All of them raise and focus on this issue of pointing guns at young children. And let's be clear, we're talking about young children of color. This does not happen by and large in white neighborhoods in Chicago. This pattern of pointing guns at close range directly at young children of color is the same across these cases. At the press conference the other morning, one of the things I said was, this is a different family, but it's the same case all over again. This has been a long-standing practice, as you pointed out. This has been a long-standing practice of the Chicago Police Department. It's gone on for decades in Chicago. The Department of Justice in 2017 said, among other things, CPD, you have a pattern and practice of engaging in less lethal, excessive force against children. And they specifically cited and discussed examples of pointing guns at kids. It's not only gun pointing. There's a lot of other forms of excessive force against kids. But because we cannot, because it's very difficult to bring this kind of case as a class action, what we have done something similar, but it's not technically a class action. Instead, we've brought multiple lawsuits, each one by a handful of family members. And I'm sad to say that we still have other cases like this that are teed up and getting ready to be filed.
And so, and I'm wondering, Mr. Hofeld, when we're talking about the pattern of excessive force by the Chicago Police Department, if it's that much of an issue, is this a part of their training? Are they trained to point guns at children?
Yeah, so there, it's a good question. I mean, so the problem is there is no clear bright line rule about when Chicago officers are allowed to draw their weapons and point them at civilians.
Wait a minute, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no clear bright line rules about that. So you mean to tell me that this choice, this decision, comes from the judgment of a police officer who feels like it is the necessary decision, the necessary move to point a gun at a 4-year-old during a raid?
That's exactly right. So what they're taught is that you're allowed to point your weapon when your safety is threatened, or maybe when somebody's non-compliant or resisting or whatever. They're taught a sort of vague general use of force standard, and then beyond that, yes, they're allowed to use their discretion as to when they think there's a threat. But of course, constitutional law is very clear that an officer is not allowed to point at someone who is fully compliant, who does not pose a specific threat to that officer or to anyone else. And the law is especially clear that when it comes to vulnerable people like young children, there's no reason to point at them. But officers have this broad discretion within these general sort of use of force principles and guidelines. And obviously, what happens, in Chicago, officers come on too strong. They come out of the box using way too much force, partly because maybe they're trying to protect themselves, partly because, we have a problem with racism. We've got officers who don't see other human beings as fully human. So all these things come into play when they're using their discretion. And yes, they often wind up pointing at kids or at other civilians who are innocent when there's no objective reason to do so.
That's just one of the details about this whole case that is disturbing. I mean, alongside of the fact that they got the wrong address. So I don't want us to minimize the trauma that has been inflicted just down to one detail. There have been many things. I mean, just the fact of busting through your door late at night and you got army gear on damn near, coming through your home with, guys just yelling and screaming is another element. But I do want to make sure that we bring up this point too, that I know that Mayor Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, has said that they're going to try to do a better job. The police superintendent, David Brown, said they're going to try to really deal with this issue. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is supposed to be the process for getting warrants, making sure that botched raids don't continue to happen? What's the process? Because there is an investigative component to getting warrants, to making sure that whatever information is coming to the police department is good information, not just some willy-nilly stuff. So what is the process? Because there is an actual legal process to that the police department need to oblige by before a raid is done, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll tell you the process, then I'll tell you the way it's been done, then I'll briefly tell you the reforms that, at least on paper, have been made recently in Chicago. I will note that the Evans-Winters case that we've been talking about was a warrantless entry. This particular case, there was no warrant involved, but there still has to be a probable cause, and there has to be a little bit of an investigation to support probable cause. But the other cases that are on your graphic, almost every other case on the graphic was a search warrant case, a bad search warrant case where they raided the wrong home. So generally, as people know, an officer is required to have probable cause before requesting a search warrant from a judge. So the officer conducts an investigation, and when he or she has enough facts to constitute probable cause, he or she writes it up into a complaint for search warrant and signs it under oath. So it's an affidavit, essentially, or a declaration. It's sworn testimony by the officer. The officer then presents that to a judge, and I should say, crucially, that an officer relies on an informant of some kind for the tip that is the basis for the investigation and that leads to the probable cause. So the officer is always relying on a John Doe informant or a confidential informant or a registered confidential informant. when the officer submits the complaint for search warrant to a judge, if it's a John Doe informant, that person may be brought before the judge as well. The judge reads the complaint for search warrant, is supposed to assess it for probable cause, ask any questions to the officer or the John Doe informant, and then make a decision on whether to approve the search warrant or not. And in Chicago, at least, I think it's similar elsewhere. There's an assistant state's attorney or an assistant district attorney that is also supposed to review the complaint for search warrant before it goes to the judge to, again, try to make sure that it appears to state enough facts for probable cause. Once, assuming a judge signs off on it, then it goes back to the police, and the police have about 72 hours in which to execute the search warrant. So that's the process. Those are the roles. What we've learned in our cases in Chicago is that police officers over-rely and sometimes exclusively rely on the word of informants who are often wrong. Yeah. And the officers don't confirm that the target can actually be found at the address the informant has given. They don't do anything to actually tie the target to the address the informant is given. So it boils down to sloppy investigation, over or exclusive reliance on informants, and then in terms of the reforms, there's now, we've been working with investigative reporters in these cases in Chicago for 2 years, and we've brought a lot of these issues to light. And eventually, as a result of the media coverage of our cases, the department started to make changes to search warrant policy and training. And so the recent changes are a product of our ongoing campaign here. And there are several important changes that are good on paper. It remains to be seen whether the department is actually going to supervise officers properly to make sure that the rubber meets the road. But now every search warrant has to be approved by a bureau chief, so there's much higher supervision that's theoretically required. Officers must verify a lot of other information that previously they were not required to verify. There's some language, it's very general and vague, but there's now some language about looking out for children and being careful to not traumatize them during the process of executing a search warrant. There's the body camera requirement has been expanded or is in the process of being expanded to other officers. It was actually only applied to patrol officers in Chicago previously. Now it's going to apply, I believe, to all officers who execute a search warrant. So there are a number of other, in the interest of time, I won't try to hit all of them, but there are another number of other important reforms that are in this new search warrant order, but no one is really sure yet how well officers are actually going to comply with them on the ground. That remains to be seen.
Wow. Mr. Hofeld, we appreciate your time to give us the latest on this, and we'd certainly like to bring you back on to continue to update us about this case. And please give our love and peace and blessings to the Winters family. It's such a tragedy that this is happening in Chicago, but it's happening across the country. But it's even more tragic when it's happening to small children. So please let the Winters family know that we are certainly here for them, and we would love to bring you back on to give us the next steps of this case.
I absolutely will. Thank you very much for having me, and I'll send your love. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hofeld.
Folks, back to that Roland unfiltered video in just one moment.
It's time to be smart. When we control our institutions, we win. This is the most important news show on television of any racial background. Y'all put $2, $3, $4, $5, $10, $15, $20, $30 on this and keep this going. What you've done, Roland, since this crisis came out in full bloom. Anybody watching this, tell your friends, go back and look at the last 2 weeks, especially of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I mean, hell, go back and look at the last 2 days. You've had sitting United States senators today, Klobuchar and Harris. Whatever you have that you can bring to Roland Martin Unfiltered to support it, please do, because this information may literally save your life.
Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered daily at 6 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, or Periscope, or go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered Daily Digital Show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com.